what's going on? It's Preacher! I've taken a few days away because I wanted to reflect. I'm epic, right?
No.
No, not in the least.
At
But I
all.
did want to think. I did want to reflect a little bit because raiding is done. Raiding is done. So I thought it was... Now we're at the midway because we know Tomb's coming, obviously. And then we know we're getting another raid when we bob off to Argus and we go Spaceman. It's time to reflect on the journey of the raiding so far and thoughts going into the Tomb of what might be coming out, what Blizzard's thought process is, and the pitfalls and issues, because we know there's been issues. We know there's been issues. So many guilds have died. In fact, if I look back, and I have spent quite a long time reviewing footage, if I look back here to our first pull of Nethendra, and I tell the 19 people, 19 people here, that it was going to be 262 days, 8 months, until those people were stood over the corpse of Gul'dan, then they might not have stuck around. I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure if I was to know that we were heading to 8 months of non-stop progress, that I would have been very excited about that prospect. Because I think that's a big common feeling that I see a lot is raiders want to raid all day, all night, every day, all day. Not really. No. Especially when you're committing so much time out of your life. Because you're committing, like, I commit 3 nights. Other guilds do 4. Some do more. When you're committing that, it becomes a major part of your life. And that's not healthy for long periods of time. Especially if you've got a family like I have. So, what I tend to, I can only speak for myself here, is I hope to go in hard, go in strong, and then get out. And then, you know, we're done and we're back on farm and we can chill until the next raid comes. Gather gear, enjoy other parts of the game, play different games, all that kind of stuff. But that has not been the case this time round. And as our guild, as casual as it is, my guild is very casual for what I was used to doing. It's still one of the highest guilds in the world, right? We're a top 300 guild. And to say that it's been 8 months non-stop and many other guilds are continuing their progress journey even now, it's been tough. It has been tough. It has been tough to stick it out. So what are my thoughts now I look back over it? Raiding in Legion has been so-so. I think that's fair to say. Emerald Nightmare for many was a disappointment, especially if you'd raided for a long time, as they reused so many boss mechanics from previous bosses, from previous raid dungeons throughout the years, that there was nothing particularly new. In fact, some of them felt lackluster compared to their big brothers, we could call them. If we look at Il'gynoth, it had some parts of Yogg-Saron and Cthulhu, but not the good stuff and not the epic feeling to it. It was just kind of a long, tedious, drawn-out fight. If we look at Xavius, basically a rip of the original Cho'Gall back in Bastion of Twilight, and all the other bosses with some target swapping and stuff, nothing particularly exciting and fresh for an experienced raider. However, for a new raider, of course, that's all going to be new and fresh, especially if you only ever done those other bosses in transmog runs. Now you actually get to deal with the mechanics and stuff. But I couldn't help but feel throughout the Emerald Nightmare that I wasn't particularly enjoying myself, purely down to the fact that the raids never grabbed me. The only boss of interest, I'd say, in the Emerald Nightmare was MYTHIC CENARIUS, which had some cool mechanics to it. On top of that, we also had issues with the Emerald Nightmare being too easy. It was too easy. We had the issue where Blizzard say, or didn't expect, Mythic Plus to play such a large role so early in the game, which I kind of find hard to swallow, as I would expect if you're saying, hey, there's gear here on repeatable content non-stop. Okay, I'm going to go and get that then. And especially with artifact power. We had a lot of new systems in Legion, and now we're starting to tease out the problems. But I want to stress this, more importantly than anything, I'm really happy Blizzard's trying new things and seeing where we go. We can only find out what the niggling problems are if we try them out. So the first thing was, of course, most people overgeared the Emerald Nightmare the day they went in, and made gear and pretty much a non-factor in a lot of instances, and it came down to just mechanical knowledge, of which there wasn't too much mechanical knowledge, although we still see, of course, people not bringing the blobs to the eye when we do Il'gynoth. But generally speaking, it was a mechanics test more than anything else, as you always had the DPS. In Rage Timers in Emerald Nightmare, not so much a big deal. Having said that, though, it was only a week or so after our guild defeated Xavius that the Trial of Valor arrived, and this is where it really started getting wonky. Blizzard had obviously learned a lot from the Emerald Nightmare. They learned that they had given a lot of gear to a lot of people before they started raiding. They learned that it was being cleared by a lot of people who probably shouldn't be clearing at that level yet. I'm not shitting on anyone here, but if you're used to farming normal, now suddenly you're doing mythic content and you're considering yourself part of the mythic raiders, whatever nonsense term you want to say, then you suddenly step into a dungeon where Blizzard has gone, okay, we need to rebalance this a little bit and turn the difficulty up, and suddenly you're like, oh shit, this is way more difficult than what we were previously clearing despite it being in a higher tier. This is crazy. I think a noticeable point here was Heroic ODYN. Heroic ODYN was no fucking joke. He was no joke. Even for guilds that had cleared Mythic Emerald Nightmare, he was no joke. He definitely turned the stats up quite a lot. And I remember in the early days, and some of you might be having those memories now, of guilds really complaining about how hard Heroic ODYN was and how long he was. Finding it very difficult to push past that. In comparison though, Mythic GUARM, Heroic and Normal GUARM, were pretty simple. Something that you can easily farm to this day. But then we got to Hellier. And Hellier was a different beast entirely. Hellier was a very proper end boss, particularly on its heroic difficulty. I actually believe heroic TOV was actually in a good place. A pretty good place. And heroic Hellier is a satisfying kill if you did it at the progress level. Bear in mind here, I'm talking about at the level of intention, not now with all extra AP traits. And I pug it this week. Yeah, that's great. But we're talking about when it originally launched in those first months or so. But then we stepped into Mythic and it really dialed up. It really dialed up. Blizzard had obviously seen that AP was at certain levels for many players, and they had to balance around the idea that people were getting way more gear, way more power than they originally thought with the Emerald Nightmare. They had heard the complaints, Emerald Nightmare's too easy, we're not into this, can we do something else? And then they did. Now, Mythic ODYN. Mythic ODYN was a stamina trial. I think most original Mythic Raiders would probably say that. Like, I recall distinctly being bored to death of the fight because nothing really interesting happens until the end of the fight. And that, unfortunately, was a trend that is to continue, is Blizzard making very long fights that don't actually pick up in urgency and stress and interest, for that matter, while all that's going on, until the end of the fight. And you have to get through this kind of tedious process first, which I remember at WarM, doing phase 1 ODYN, like, while farming it, just so we could practice the last phase, was a real chore. A real chore. As was then the second phase, which is another 5 minutes or so. It was like, and then you get to the end bit and you had the potential to wipe very, very quickly, and then you do it all again. Really straining out Raiders' interest in the fight and trying to keep motivation going. And obviously motivation is a big factor when you're learning new fights and you're inevitably wiping over and over again and using consumables, is long fights can really take their shore on you. But of course we progress past that. And then we get to what I called my favourite boss so far in all of Legion. Now don't scoff. Let me put some context to this bitch. Mythic GUARM. Original version Mythic GUARM was, for me, the best boss in Legion at the time. Easily the best boss in Legion. It took the idea of the DPS check, but did not take the route that they usually take, which is a very static fight. We have seen fights like Patchwork and the Butcher, all these fights that were huge DPS checks, but this time they threw in lots and lots of mobility needed, particularly on Mythic, while still maintaining the DPS output in order to actually defeat the challenge, while also adding in this interesting mechanic where people would have to really consider their movement in terms of debuffs, putting a lot of stress on the healers, in terms of not just raw healing output, but getting the dispels perfect, particularly with the debuffs that overlap with breath, and adding lots of new elements to it. And this created a very intense, relatively short fight. It is a relatively short fight, which the intensity can maintain while it's relatively short, and they managed to balance it in such a good way that most guilds were killing it just as it hit in rage. I want you to consider how difficult that is for a moment. Any combination of classes all coming together in certain ways and balancing it in order to be at in rage when you kill it, to gain that intense moment as the seconds count down and you've got people alive and you are pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing in order to get it, and you've dealt with all these complex things along the way, and you finally get it. It's a very satisfying, wonderful experience. And that's why I came up with GUARM is actually one of my favorite bosses. Of course, Blizzard then nerfed it the next week. Ayo! Take that, preacher. Yeah, they nerfed it literally the following week after we killed it. They nerfed it and changed it around so you couldn't do things like one-tank it or try and dodge healers. They moved some stuff around and made the fight significantly easier. I think originally it was a 5% HP nerf. I should have checked that, but I think it was 5%, and someone can correct me if not. Which is significant. That is enormous for GUARM. That gave you enormous leeway, because it allowed somebody to die, which is the important thing there. It allowed somebody to die, which you couldn't really have in the other versions. But after that, of course, we progress onwards, and then we reach a fight I disliked, but respected, was Mythic Hellier. Now, very few people listening to this probably ever contended with Mythic Hellier. At least not when it was relevant, as we got a kill. We got the kill the week before the Nighthold came out, and we were still in the top few hundred, top 3. I think we were top 300 there. So very, very few people actually contended with Mythic Hellier. Now, why did I dislike Mythic Hellier? Mythic Hellier was a dance, very similar to Operator Thogar from HFC, where if you ever did Operator Thogar on Mythic, it was a dance. You had to, all the raid had to be in certain positions at certain times, otherwise it was a wipe. And Mythic Hellier was that for a long, 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 long time. And this was the real introduction of super, super punishing mechanics that affect widespread people. Typically before this point, if you goofed something up, like Mythic GUARM, for example, if you goofed up your debuff and didn't move to the right place, you would die. Okay? And that's it. You would die, you can be combat res, whatever. Mythic Hellier turned it up to if one person makes a serious mistake or brain farts or whatever, everybody's dead, start again. And Mythic Hellier, for many people, consisted of 30-second to 1 minute pulls in the beginning, while people started to learn the dance. So imagine that you're running back, you're buffing up, you're talking, you're getting ready, pull, dead, start again. Pull, dead, start again. All the time, just plowing through each step by step. I did compare it to the Impossible Game. Some of you might know this, the idea of bouncing the cube along a course, and just trying to get it perfect, trying to get these precision movements done over and over again. Now, not quite as hard as that, but it did magnify it by the fact that you had to get 20 people to do that simultaneously. Otherwise, the fight doesn't work. And it's also very long. And you're trying to coordinate all these things. And what you get is a very satisfying experience of having this dance play out. This really wonderful spectacle of all the raid coordinated in such a way to make this work. But a fight that is just a roller coaster and you're along for the ride. And that's it. Your basic end goal is to not die. And that took a lot of the fun away from me. But a satisfying kill nonetheless. But I did release a video at that point saying, I really hope this trend doesn't continue in the Nighthold of outrageously punishing mechanics and last phases that are equally, if not more punishing than anything you've done before on particularly long fights. So how did that play out? Note the progression continues. We kill Hellier, Mythic Hellier, but Nighthold came the next week. I'm on record as saying Nighthold is a fantastic raid, and I still stand by that to this day. I do Nighthold probably 5 times a week in one form or another, particularly while preparing characters for guides, and I'm still not tired of it. I still relatively enjoy being there. Now, you consider that. You're doing the same dungeon 5 times a week, and it's still not like I can't believe I've got to be in this place. And I'm sure many people do feel that way, but I don't feel that way. Ironically, what I enjoy the least is the mythic version of Nighthold. So let's take a step back. Normal and heroic Nighthold, I think, are honestly wonderfully, wonderfully balanced and paced. Nighthold Normal is a great introduction to the fights. A great, great introduction to the fights. They allow for many mistakes all the way through, including Gul'dan. You can make lots of mistakes there and still continue to learn and develop and progress and perhaps even get the kill, even with many problems. And you could do that from week 1. You could do that from week 1. Heroic is a nice step up. The mechanics are a little bit more punishing. You can't afford too many mistakes, but you can have mistakes. You can have mistakes. You don't need an A-list top tier squad to get through heroic. You don't. You don't need the best players in the world passing in the top 99% to get through there. You don't need that. And heroic Gul'dan is a wonderful step up in difficulty to prepare you to go into mythic. There is no doubt whatsoever if you can defeat heroic Gul'dan, you're going to get Scorper on Mythic down, right? That's going to happen, and that's the way it should be. And it's still a very satisfying kill. I see plenty of members of our community who are like, we finally got Heroic Ghoul down. We started a new guild, or we started actually raiding, and we stepped it up from normal. We thought, what the hell? And we got Heroic Ghoul down, and I am totally happy with that kill. Fair fucking play to you. That shows you how well designed Heroic is. Mythic, though, what the fuck? What happened here? Why did it happen? Why did it happen this way? Okay, so why is a good question. Why did Mythic Nighthold end up the way it was? And I'm not talking about how it is right now. I'm talking about for the staunch time Blizzard kept it exactly the same. Firstly, Blizzard were very aware people are about to or have capped their artifact weapons. That's a big deal because that buff of all that plus damage was really, really powerful. Way too powerful to be ignored. 20% extra damage is a lot of extra damage, especially when you multiply it by a team of Mythic quality players. That's a lot of extra DPS. So we obviously trundle in and we've got Scorper on Mythic. Scorper on Mythic can be considered a gift boss in all tiers, I think, from normal all the way up until Mythic. And I think that's okay. A lot of people have issues with gift bosses, but I'd like to sort of tell you a story because most of you won't have been there. But if any of you ever did Blackwing Lair in vanilla, where there was no gift boss, it was one of the most demotivating things in the world for a guild that was actually progressing there. And that's because Razorgore the Untamed was no fucking gift boss. He was not. Some people just skipped on and joined a guild that was farming it. I had plenty of people in vanilla telling me Razorgore's easy. I'm like, bro, you joined a guild that was 4 bosses deep in Blackwing Lair. You never had to learn this with people who had only just killed Ragnaros and were now stepping in there. And it was one of the most demotivating things ever, was to rock into Blackwing Lair, go up against Razorgore, and not even be able to get past the first room. You couldn't get through it, and it would take progress, and it would take time, and people just like couldn't be asked even going. It gave a bad taste to the whole dungeon. The first boss being something you can get past gets you your foothold. And they pretty much repeated that forever. And Courage 40 was exactly the same. There was easier bosses in Nax 40, despite what people like to believe. Going into TVC, Mulgore, not that difficult. Karazhan could be your foothold for all it matters. Similar with Void Reaver and Tempest Keep. We can keep going. Black Temple. Nagentis is pretty much a gift boss, as is Supremus. Sunwell, different kettle of fish, right? Sunwell was designed for the hardcore of the hardcore. Wrath of the Lich King, as we know, most of the raids started off easy. Certainly nobody really struggled on Flame Leviathan with the towers. Nobody had a real problem with that. You got your foothold, and that continues to this day, and I think it's a good idea. But then in Mythic, what people notice is that pretty much Chromatic and Trilliax were all pretty simple. Of course, I'm not judging anybody who's struggling there, but relatively to like Heroic Gul'dan, they were all on a similar, if not slightly easier scale. That's all I'm saying. No big deal. But then go and fuck yourself. Go and stick it up your ass, because now we're turning the fucking game up. I found it really strange, and I always raid without knowing what the bosses do. I like to pull them for the first time. I don't research them. I don't recommend this for everybody, by the way. But I like to experience it for the first time myself and see what's different, what's the boss is doing. And lo and behold, to my surprise, when the raid leader says we're skipping Spellblade and going straight to Croesus, and my mind exploded. We're going to skip over this boss that has posed no challenge to us whatsoever in normal or heroic, and not even close to a challenge, and has been a meme since day one. And I'm only saying that from a mythic raiding perspective. And we're going straight to the DPS check, which is an old school style DPS check. That blows your mind. We're skipping out on loot potentially here. So my mind started worrying, like there's something weird about Spellblade in Mythic. But I don't want to research it. I want to wait and see what it is. So we go to Croesus, cross the DPS check. Again, wonderfully timed like GUARM. Most people's first kills of Croesus involved killing it as it smashed the last bridge, or trying to get a mage to ice block it to keep the fight going so dots could tick a little longer. It was that close. It was down to the wire for most guilds in their first kill at the current time, which is the same for us. And then we obviously were presented with choices. And I'm pretty sure our guild killed Botanist first. Again, my mind exploding. Mythic Botanist is going to be easier for us to do right now than Spellblade Allurial. What's going on here? And then, of course, as we know, Blizzard tuned after the first 3, 4, and up to be extremely difficult. I want people to understand this who might be sitting there smug saying we never had that problem, or other people not believing it. But at one point, there were 2,000 guilds stuck Bear that in mind. And Blizzard did nothing about it. They left it there. In their stubbornness that they have never shown in the past, they left that happening. They just left them there. And we obviously found out Spellblade Oriole needed 5 healers just for the amount of absurd damage that was coming out, with things that could just one-shot you blindly if there was even a slight inconvenience of overlapping abilities. Oh, you got Mark of Frost and you got targeted by the fire, you're fucked. You need a cooldown, you need to be rescued, you need wings, you need fucking block it, you need something, otherwise it's just going to blow you the shit up. Oh, you don't have access to any of those things right now? Fuck you, you're dead. It was the continuation of the trend that we'd seen on Hellier, which was these very, very punishing mechanics that literally wreck your try. And if you lose people, you're not going to make it. It's as simple as that. The boss is just going to annihilate you into nothingness. I did mention Starbro. When we first reviewed the Nighthold after the first week, I think B and Andy both agreed that Starbro was the worst boss in there. Now, that's a very controversial statement because people love Starbro, particularly for the scenario and the room that it presents to you. From a rating standpoint, though, I really dislike Starbro because on normal and heroic, nothing happens. Nothing happens in that fight. It's a wonderfully gorgeous room, sure, but as a fight, nothing happens there. But now the rumours are circulating that Starbro is the nightmare. Many people following that Method, Serenity, Exorcist were all stuck at Starbro in the first weeks, and we're like, okay, this is going to be a problem. And I've got to be honest, I was filled with dread with the fight that I already very much disliked, potentially being one of the most difficult in the dungeon, and us having to spend a hell of a long time there. I don't think I need to go into detail as to why I really hate that the 10% of a boss is dedicated to showing off your fancy room. I kind of skipped over Botanist there, but I just want to point out that Botanist was once again a continuation of this trend of having the really intense, interesting part of the fight happen at the very end after a really long process, only to potentially be killed within the first few seconds of actually reaching there. So progress in that fight could, for many people, contain the absurd notion of tolerating a very dull and long phase 1 and 2 to then be instantaneously called out for murder once you enter the interesting phase at the end, and just have to sit there and hope everybody else kills it for you. Let's not go too far into there. Let's just say I've heard from many, many guilds that if they could, they would never do Mythic Botanist again, even now. Even on farm, even though it's a one-shot every week, I just fucking hate that fight. So moving on then, Starbro. So as we know, Starbro, as many of you probably know now, was the fight that basically got weak auras destroyed in terms of friendly nameplates. Due to, again, this introduction of an exceedingly raid-wide punishing mechanic should one person have a brain fart or a minor error, a minor lag spike, that's it, your raid's dead. And that came in the form of the Grand Conjunction. A very, very, once again, simple mechanic. Very, very simple mechanic of you have a colour, pair up. But this mechanic is so punishing that if anybody makes a mistake, it's a wipe. And it starts happening from the very beginning of the fight. Is that all sorts of crazy add-ons were devised in order to make it as easy as humanly possible to not have this wipe the raid. Should the mechanic been nowhere near as punishing as it was, I have no doubt we would never have seen, or maybe it would have taken much later to get add-ons like that. But it's no surprise to me they came into existence. 2,000 guilds stuck there, working and pushing away. What makes it so hard? So I guess many of you probably never done Mythic Starbro, and therefore it feels a little absurd that, is this fight actually that hard? Now it's not, right? We've crossed over that line. Originally, yes it was. What was so difficult about it? One, Grand Conjunction was an indefinite, it was just a calamity. If anybody got it through any point in the fight, and it happens plenty of times in the fight, it was game over, start again. Not only that, but it's, as you probably know if you've ever done it even on LFR, it's split into 3 different phases, or technically 4 if we count the 10%. But after that we have Frost and we have Fell, and then we have the final one where the void, the thing that should not be, appears. The problem was all of these things have the potential to annihilate your raid, and that became very difficult. I can tell you that this was the point where I switched from Fire to Frost, because Fire was a liability. If I got the Frost enchantment that takes over you, there was a high chance I would die. So I'd have to come up with strategies like blocking the first one, trying to do something using like extra shields and a potion, or hoping something legendary would help me in some way for the second one, asking for sacrifices, all this kind of stuff in order to get through that. Not very fun. It's like being like, oh shit, I might die in a second. Similar with the fell phase, you took a step 1 second too late and you're burning for more damage than the healers could possibly outdo, and you might drop off. Combined with the strict management and the RNG factor of where meteors would drop, it became very, very awkward sometimes to deal with that, especially with lower DPS than we have today. And then we got into the final phase, which has some overlapping abilities that just flat out can one-shot people. And we have to deal with that. We have to spread the raid out. We have to prevent this damage. And all these things combined created a very horrible scenario. But again, mechanically, not too difficult. Most people could deal with all these things. But the fact is that slight mistakes, which can happen over a very long fight, it's like a 10-minute long fight, then you can just wipe and you got to start again. You got to stop again. Elisand. Elisand speaks for itself as the culmination of everything that we'd seen in terms of excessively punishing mechanics, with of course you skim a ring in any form or another and you're dead, and you need everybody alive. Same thing, same old. And then on to Gul'dan, which, as you know, I did a video recently. I absolutely loved Gul'dan because it contained none of that shit. It was all down to raid coordination, teamwork, communication, thinking, allowing for movement and adaptation, all the good things that we knew Blizzard were capable of. And that was where Mythic Nighthold destroyed so many guilds. I'm sure many people are wondering how we kept a roster like we did. And that's down to a number of factors that I think is worthy of a different video. But to see 19 faces on Nathendra and to know that they were stood over Gul'dan's corpse 8 months later is an achievement unto itself. And that sort of guild togetherness, if you want to get a little bit hippie on it, is not easy. So coming out the Nighthold, I feel a sense of relief. I very much enjoy doing all the rest of the Nighthold. Mythic is kind of okay now with all the extra AP, the nerfs that the Mythic has had, so we clear in one night, so I'm not going to complain too much. It only takes a couple of hours or so to get through the Mythic Nighthold, depending on whether or not we wipe on things like Trilliax like we did last week. I don't know. It happens when you're raiding, I suppose. But going into Tomb, what are the thoughts that I'm hearing from the raiding community, and what do I think myself? I think Tomb is going to be easier. But not just because they want to make it easier. The reason I think Tomb is easier is balancing what the bosses need to do is going to be far simpler for Blizzard this time, particularly with Concordance, the new Concordance, being nowhere near as effective as the one previous. So they don't have to worry too much about people massively overdoing it. Not only that, the Broken Shore has vastly increased the amount of legendary items people are getting in a space, which means they can account for what gear people are going to be wearing, what legendaries they're going to have. Instead of saying some people might have all these legendaries out of the 2 or 3 they've got, now they could say they probably have the ones they want for the most part, or at least are close to having them. There'll still be the odd person who has been screwed over, obviously. But generally speaking, with all the increased chances of legendaries in the raiding community, there's a reasonable chance people will have the good ones. So they can balance the raid much easier. My hopes are, and that's a general feeling, by the way, is most people believe the Tomb will be somewhat easier. Will it be too easy or will it be too hard? That's yet to say. It's all guesswork at this point. But general feeling is that the Tomb will be easier than Nighthold, which I'm okay with. I'm fine with. I like a challenge, but for the right reasons. Being overly punished for anybody else's mistake and having to just come back and start again, I don't find that fun. I find it quite frustrating after 100 or so pulls. Is like, oh, I had a brave out this time, or something didn't work, or I fell rushed off a bridge, or I clipped through the floor, or something along those lines. I had a minor lag spike and that's it. We've wiped, start again. I'm looking forward to far less of that. Way less of that. We don't need things that can't be worked through. Grand Conjunction should be able to be survived, but it's at the cost of a lot of stuff, like healer cooldowns and personal cooldowns, that are going to punish us pretty severely later on, but we can work through it. Instead of it being an instantaneous wipe mechanic, that's not fun. It's not fun for that. It's like, oh, we've seen it, okay, start again. That's really tedious. I think so. A lot of people, this comes down to a general idea of game design in general, believe that one-shot mechanics are the difficulty people are looking for. One-shot mechanics are incredibly easy to make. if you hit somebody with, if let's say the average raider has 4.5 million, 5 million HP, we just make a mechanic that hits them for 6 million, right? It's not that hard. Oh, they can cooldown that? Cool. We'll make it 8 million, 10 million. Making one-shot mechanics ain't hard. Making it so it's challenging but doable, that's the difficult bit. And I feel, personally, it's a little bit on the lazy side to just make mechanics that kill everybody. I think that's a little bit lazy. Instead of saying, oh, you fucked this up, all right. Now it just got a whole lot more difficult for a period of time. You're going to have to change your game. You're going to have to use the healing cooldowns right now that you maybe wanted to use later on. And maybe people are going to have to play a little bit better to recover from this mistake. But you could do stuff about it. Instead of, oh, did someone make a mistake? Yeah, game over, start again. And just waiting for everybody to click over. That's what I'm hoping for in Tomb. And that's my predictions for Tomb. And I will look forward to your thoughts as well. Reflection on raiding, team. Bye-bye.